people online?
Yes, there are.
Okay, we can't see you, but I'm going to take that in faith. So let's go around the room and just introduce yourself for the record and say that whether you're here in person, and then we'll go online. Obviously, if you're saying that you're here in person, but we'll do it anyway for the recording purposes. and then we'll hit the people online. So we'll start with you, Casey.
President.
Lee Furman in person.
Jason Robinson in person.
Stacey Detweiler in person.
Seth Barnes in person.
Josh Steve in person.
Amanda Sullivan-Astor in person. Wendy Garlock in person.
Will Tucker in person.
Okay, those online. Can't see you, so I can't call.
Adam Coble, present virtually.
Thanks, Adam. Is there anyone else? Carrie or David?
There's a 541. Oh, that was the
Okay. Okay, the ODF employees in the room, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Terry Cree, I'm the staff management program coordinator. Michael Curran, I'm the district forester for ODS Forestry. Gregory Road Specialist for Forest Resources Division. Development Public Affairs based on Salem.
Yarrow. Public affairs.
Josh Hampton, NSID coordinator out of Salem.
All right, I think that's everyone. Unless there's any members of the public online. Okay, so, previous meeting executive summary, did people get a chance to look at that? Are there any, I guess we don't approve those, right? We just.
Well, I think last time you folks did want to accept them.
Okay, all right.
Is there any,
Is there any?
it's not necessarily a substantial decision.
Sure.
That can pull up on screen, everyone has it.
Yep.
Hey, Terry.
Yeah.
I might just suggest, instead of under public comment, instead of saying there was no public comment, which makes it seem like we didn't take public comment, I might say something a little bit different, like no one from the public provided comment.
Okay.
Minor.
Yeah.
That's a good suggestion. Anything else? Okay. All right. Not hearing anything. I think those are satisfactory. Thank you.
So, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. There are restrooms both, there's a men's room and when you go down this hall, and if you go down steps, there's also a men's room, and then down the hall, there's a restroom that isn't labeled, so that's also another option. So, as needed, there are, so those are here, so there's exits are out that way. Anything else at this stage? No, if something bad happens, our evacuation area is a lot of parking lot down here. Thank you. Public comment. There is a Eric Krenzush, I'm not sure if I can even say it correctly online. Other than that.
Eric, do you wish to give any public comment?
No, thank you.
All right, there we go. Thanks for joining us. Okay. Well, there is a quorum present, so we've determined that. And is there any other updates that we need to discuss before we?
Just real quick, so the board did approve Saturday on the report to them. The participation grants changed $2,000 a month. The legislature adjourned. I haven't results of the budget for the disaster management program. So I heard late last week that the goal was to keep it at 4.8 million, which was governor's recommendation, but I don't know the final results of that. I don't know.
Did anybody else hear any of the other organizations? Frankly, I was too busy on Friday to hear it, so I missed our organization's update on session, but I know session was fast and furious, concluding like yesterday. So I think there's still report outs to be had. I don't know if anybody else heard.
As far as I know that nothing has changed for the EMT budget or the AMP budget from the also recommended budget, which they adopted in January and like.
Okay. All right. Yep.
Sorry, that was very.
No, it sounds, it sounds about, that matches Terry's intel. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
He has to say.
Yeah. Okay.
Another quick thing, we're thinking about doing a joint meeting with the IRC. We're in discussion with INR, working out a contract, getting IRC up and running over time, and they're considering, INR is thinking about having a joint meeting, sort of a kickoff meeting for IRC that would be, say, for example, first day just them, and then overlapping with this group for part of the time, in part to, so everyone can meet, see what your respective roles and responsibilities are, that type of thing. So that's the potential for September, October.
So what are you thinking, Terry? And I know this is, you're not completely in charge of all of that. Once the Institute for Natural Resources gets their contract and starts, you know, they're going to have their own coordination effort with the IRST, and that's all great. What are you anticipating as far as their first meeting date? I think,
Yeah, we haven't.
like September timeframe,
Yeah.
something like that? Okay.
Yeah. And the part of the challenge is there's a big contract that we're writing, and that has to go through DOJ review, and so there's a number of things that need to happen, and before they can fully launch. And September, I think, is a possibility, maybe October, but I think we're hoping, and August even could be a possibility. It's just there's a number of things up in the air that take some time to work through.
In the meantime, you did send out a congratulations type thing to each of those 5 members. They're aware, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And if they have any questions individually, they should reach out to you.
Yes.
All right.
And then just a reminder, there's no meeting in July.
Of AMC.
Of the AMC, sorry. Okay, any questions about the vesting?
What happened with the IRST funding?
That's rolled into the AMT budget that we don't know the results of it, that we think the legislature was going to approve 4.8 million total for everything related to the disaster management program.
I was just wondering if the participation grants for them, or if they've been communicating with about that. And if
We're in communication.
Thank you.
And is their participation grant the same as ours?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And then I'll pull it up when we're in transition, what the budget numbers are. I knew that it's just lower than I wanted.
Great. As of 5 months ago, they're each 80% of what we have requested. It was like the governor's recommendation, what happens later.
Okay.
So, research topics. And so just a couple introductory concepts. So part of something, a couple things to keep in mind. One is that over time, we'll refine the process organize and prioritize topics on a regular basis. So that's going to be an ongoing discussion regularly. So if you don't have your research topic, if a month from now you think of something, don't sweat. That's the second point. Email to me, and I'll capture it and make sure that as you folks decide that annually or biannually, we're going to revisit, here's our list, here's our process of things, it goes from tier 2 to tier 1 versus priorities, and we'll work through that. That's not all defined right now, but I'll work with folks in the room here to do that process. Any questions about that conceptually?
I guess, add a comment. One idea that we've been contemplating is maybe establishing kind of like a smaller work group, because I think that process is more straightforward now. We have sort of legislative direction, but I think it will be a lot more complicated in the future. Competing priorities, budget challenges, there's a whole wide range of things we might want to cover. So how do we create kind of that parking lot of items? How do we prioritize? How do we fold that into the budget cycle? So rather than trying to do that today or in the next few meetings, like creating a little bit of a working group that could help inform the development of that process.
Yep, agreed. And Stacy and I talked about this and looped in Terry. I think this is that's a smart way to go, because then it gives us the time, like Stacy was talking about, time for those to really kind of suss out what should be the cadence or timing for that, so is it yearly, as you have up there, annual, biannual? How does that sync up with things like agency POPs and preparation for budgeting cycles? How do you sync up with Board of Forestry to have, allow them to have that interplay with those priority topics? And then also just, what is our process for refining those topics and ensuring that we're clear in what the topics are and what people are thinking before we kind of move into that. So I don't think it has to be a terribly complex process, but putting a little bit more thought around that, I think, would be helpful for everyone moving forward on how we do that and when we do that, all that sort of thing.
So, yeah, I was gonna add one thing. I know, Josh, you brought up like a kind of a range of them with areas within research topics, and I wonder, like, I'd be happy to be part of figuring out what it looks like. Do you also want to be part of that conversation and how we develop a process, essentially?
Yeah.
Where do you want to go with it?
I'm fine either way. If my input's useful, I'm happy to. Terry, before we go on to the proposed topics, in your email you had kind of differentiated a bit between research topics and research questions. If everyone else is amenable to it, would you be willing to just kind of give a quick sketch of kind of the difference between a topic versus a question?
Sure. So the topic is a broad theme, and even broad is, there's quite a bit of range. Amphibians is gargantuan. Eastern steep slopes in Eastern Oregon is narrower, but those are still not something that you can hand off to somebody to say, research that. Well, what does that mean? So the PFA authors in working with ODF put those first three in rule. These are the first three priorities. The next stage of the process is this committee works on those to refine those into one or more research questions for each topic. And that's something that could be handed off to a researcher, and you don't have to have it perfectly honed, but you want to have it close in terms of, this is our policy question. And then the researchers can take that, the IRC can take that and rework the question, hone it a little bit more to there's specificity needed, or they could say, did you mean A, path A, or path B with what you're looking for here, testable research question. And then that moves into the process where IRC develops a suite of information that, for any question, there could be multiple paths to answer it. You could get the Maserati or the Chevy Nova version, which you want to afford, and here's how long it should take, here's how much certainty you get, that kind of thing. And then from there, all that information will come back to you folks to say, okay, we sent 3 questions to them, we got back 5 proposals. Given our process, given our discussion that we'll have, once you see all that information, you'll narrow that down. Okay, we've got, I don't know the numbers, $3 million over the next biennium for research, and these 5 proposals would be $5 million. So we're going to have to put one of these, either delay a question or go the less expensive route. So that prioritization becomes a research agenda. So topic is general, research questions focused, but still you need more information to say, here's how the general approach is going to take, and then the research agenda that you folks develop, send to the board to approve the budget for it, and then the IRC implements it. Any questions or further clarification needed on that?
Go ahead, Wendy.
It might have to do with the fact that the agenda, like, just seems, after you get the specific questions, seems a little bit confusing to me that after that you have the agenda. Like, it sounds to me like maybe you're meeting some sort of directional accomplishment of the questions together. Could you talk about what agenda means?
Sure. So the agenda, so the questions, let's say you come up with 4 questions. You send it to IRC, and they say, okay, we can answer these to this degree of certainty and this for this much money, and it would take this much time. And let's say for those 4 questions, let's just use, they come back with one proposal, is the term in the rule, it's not the best choice word, but one sort of estimate of what it would take to answer each question. But each of those 4 questions put together, the cost would be $5 million. That's where you say, okay, so we've got $3 million, and how do we want to divvy up this money to implement the research, given that we can't do everything? So our agenda for the next biennia is this question, the 4th question, whichever you decide, is going to be put on the back burner. We'll get to it in 2 years, 3 years, unknown, but we're not going to get to it right now. So the agenda is specifying both particular questions that might be higher priority and ones you're going to do right now, and as well as here's the overall approach, so that when they put out a request for proposal, there's some substance to say, we want things a certain way. And there's a lot of this is still to be worked out, the degree of specificity that provides.
And there's got to be some fluidity in the process to be able to not only deal with our, the topics and from a research perspective, but then also match that up with the budget. I am slightly offended by your connotation of a Chevy Nova. I drove one in high school.
There's recognition, there's a difference in cost.
It wasn't a Maserati, I guess. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Adam.
Oh, thanks. And thanks, David, for watching me and my raised hand. And I appreciate the Chevy Nova comment. I drove a Toyota Tercel pretty much most of my life. But so just some specificity around the question. I kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, Terry, but I think like the question, I see that as almost you know, sort of a hypothesis in a way to test a hypothesis, which is typically done, you know, as you're aware, the scientific approach. And I think that it'll be important from this group to have a, you know, it's sort of like the questions is a hypothesis just kind of framed up as a question, and it'll be important that it's framed up in a way that it's testable, and in a way that the question can be answered. So yeah, I think that's going to be a key aspect to the success of getting the right work completed that the group wants to see. But just wanted to add that piece there about the question.
Okay. Did you have a follow-up, Wendy, or?
Great answer, thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right. Oh, Amanda's got hers up. Okay, there we go.
It's okay, sir. So, I just have a question about, you know, as we move into this conversation around research topics and potentially voting, you know, pretty substantial decisions. I think that it's really important that our research topics are quite focused. And I went back through, and I'll have additional comments when we go to the next slide on that specificity that I would like, and then what I'd be speaking. But I think in order for us to have really good research questions associated with those topics, the topics need to be pretty focused. And I think that, especially with these first few, I have reason to believe, based on the report language, that they can be significantly heightened from what we have right now. So I think moving forward, I guess I might disagree, Terry, with your perspective of that they're very large and can be very lofty, or I think that's going to make it even more difficult for us to get to research questions from that. I think that the research topic should be relatively focused.
Certainly, it's easier to get to a research question if the topic is a little bit more narrow. So I think that's a valid point. Okay, so you have on there, email Terry if additional research topics consideration later. I'm guessing that will be a part of the conversation for that group, that work group that Stacy talked about. It, you know, how do we create a parking lot, so to speak, of other things that people think, you know, we should consider for the future. And so I don't know, with that, I guess we're ready to move on to the next slide and start talking about the actual topic. Stacy.
If I could just add one more thought on sort of items to consider as we're developing this process. We have public comment period for each of our meetings, and I think appreciate Terry, you circulating Deb Brown's comments related to this specific item. I think it will be important to make sure that we consider how public comment is also integrated into our consideration, excuse me, of these research topics, and I think that's an important part of this process. So just wanted to flag that.
And perhaps something for discussion for that work group as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, we're in relatively new territory for an ODS committee, and correct me if you see it differently, public affairs folks, but typically public comments and doing things a certain way, we're having to do things differently for the EFD because it is a little more visible, especially contentious down the road. So things like public comment ahead of time, you know, just for this meeting, I had several people email saying, well, I don't see meeting materials, how can I provide public comment? Well, that's a valid question. And we've been challenged because with a meeting, you know, board meetings have months between, and there's a lead time of several months to develop board materials, and so that can show up on a website at least a week or 10 days before a board meeting. But we've been having a meeting every month and scrambling to get materials together. So just saying that there's a set of growing pains and learning that you know, agree, public comment is important, and, okay, so how do we do this to meet those needs? That's, we're aware of that.
Amanda?
I just have a quick follow-up since Stacy brought it up. I guess I was a little bit, not shocked, but I guess, I don't know, had a little bit of concern that there was, you know, just one letter sent to us. I have to imagine that other people commented on the AMPC during the rule revision process or, you know, the adoption by the board. So I guess I didn't know why that one was singled out compared to having a suite or having a different process. Because it seemed like, you know, we have public comment available. Any agency can come and provide comment at that in that public space. So I just, as far as like equity and fairness, I was wondering why that got called out.
Sure. So that person, Dan Brown from EPA, emailed me last week saying, this is my public comment for Monday. Should I show up in person or will you send this to them? Or would you please send this to the committee? So I sent it to the whole committee. I considered, well, I can dig up all the public comments from last fall. That would take more time than I had, and there's hundreds, and how I sit through, and so it would be that, and that kind of speaks to that. Okay, we're in new territory. You know, I think that somebody from media saying, I would like to see, I'd like to know more about what's happening at the meeting. And going forward, the ideal is to have something out in advance so that people can provide public comments for you to consider. And so valid concern.
Stacy?
Yeah, I totally agree with that equity point, Amanda. I think that's kind of what I was trying to get at. You know, if we decide we do this decision every July, then there's some lead up where folks can make sure that they get their comment in, and we've, you know, laid out what the current list is. I don't know what the process looks like, but that's what I'm imagining. So that, totally agree. People should have the opportunity, in addition to our every meeting public comment period, a more extended time where they know that this is coming up, because I think it's really important information for this committee to have.
David? Go ahead.
I just want to make sure I'm following the question concern here, and sounds like it's related to the Board of Forestry meeting and that there was no public comment, or am I off base?
No, I think what we're discussing at this point, and thanks for the opportunity to clarify, is public comment as it pertains to the AMC. And I think Terry is expressing at this point some growing pains the department is having based on the fact that this is a little bit more of a public committee than, and I use that sort of public in air quotes, committee with more potential public interest than some of the other committees, where public comment is a pretty easy thing to get through because they don't get a lot of public comment. And especially here in this space where we're talking about voting on priority topics or priority research moving forward, I think we can, and it's probably a fair observation that we can expect a little bit more of input than the typical, you know, some of the other subcommittees of the board because of that, because and so we should account for that and figure out how to make that a part of the process. You know, probably will require us to be a little bit more, send out some materials in advance, well in advance, and then prepare for that time that it's going to take to have that those public comments. And I think Amanda was responding to EPA sent in a comment that Terry forwarded to everyone, and it just so happens that I believe it was also the comment that they gave. It was like the Xerox copy of what they gave to the Board of Forestry back a year ago or whatever it was when these rules were adopted that formulated the AMC. And so Amanda, assuming that all they were doing was forwarding their comments from back then, suggested that why is that the only comment that we're receiving here? Because there was a lot of other people that I'm sure gave comment on the AMC. And so if we're being asked to read through those again or consider those again, then it should be the full suite of those and not just one person's or one agency's comments. And that's a valid point. And Terry is basically saying that that was the result of a conversation he had where Dan Brown from EPA said, "This is my public comment for Monday." And said, it's the same one, please forward it, or I'll show up and give it myself, which is be fine either way. And so Terry forwarded it, but it begs the sort of consideration that we think about public comment as we go through this process. Again, underscoring, I think, the validity of having a work group spend a little bit of time on thinking our way through this.
Great. Thanks for the clarification, Seth.
I'm listening. All right, so, we gotta, go ahead.
Public comment. Most of the committees, it's the key decision points, specified amount of time, say 30 days.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Public comment, and then it's kind of all consolidated so everybody sees all the public comments. And then also they have the open public comments at every meeting.
Yeah.
So there's two different types. I just wanted to be clear that you can have a formalized public comment period and key decision points, and then still have the open public comment period.
Yeah, you bet.
That'll be up to you, the committee, with those key points where you'd like to go out.
Yep.
For a formal public comment period.
Yeah, thank you.
And that the formal is required in law for certain things, but not necessarily for, I don't know the law for EMC, what's required by law. I'm pretty sure it's not your substantial decision. And so, sort of another option is, here's a public comment or public input period of
Yeah.
days. I agree, 30 days would be great. And right now, we would have a hard time meeting that simply because we're still figuring everything out. But a year from now, I think we can potentially have things.
Right. So we'll add that to the list of things to consider in that work group, as Terry. And again, the group that's going to get together work on this is going to be giving input to Terry. So Terry can then take that input and think his way through providing the full committee some ideas about how we might formalize that process moving forward. So anybody that wants to be a part of that and help Terry think through that, we'll formalize that and get a few people that are willing to volunteer or be voluntold. Hopefully volunteer to help with that. And I appreciate Casey's willingness to join in that. So we'll do that here in a minute or two. But let's now get back to the topic at hand, which is voting on these research topics for right now. And I hope, based on all this conversation, people are aware that this is not these are not our forever topics. This is just getting us through like the moment so that we can start the rest of this process, which is formalizing some questions. And you'll recall from a last meeting or the meeting before where Terry had outlined sort of that process. I think our hope is that this will then move us into some conversation about research topics, or not topics, research questions themselves, and honing them down to some specific questions that can then be handed off to the IRST once they get their legs under them. The timing for all of that, I think, is like, hopefully we would have some questions ready to hand off to the IRST by end of this year, first part of next year, to then allow the AMPS or the IRST to turn on that. The reason why it's going to take that kind of time is, you have the holidays built in there, Christmas, New Year's, and even Thanksgiving sort of time frame. But then also you have the IRST is going to need time to get their feet underneath them, get their charter done, which I imagine will be their first item of business. But they'll meet in September, I think, around that time frame for the first meeting. October time frame, they'll start to figure out what a definition for what is best available science. How do they figure that out? That's something they also have to do. And that will then get them ready to receive our questions. If we can be earlier than that, I think that's fine and good. If we can deliver some questions to them by, October, November, then all great. But I think that's the time frame we're looking at for developing those questions, and getting past this hurdle of the research topics will then allow us to start having that next conversation. And we don't have to have all of our questions to them all at once either. We can, if we get a couple questions that we feel good about, we can deliver those and then continue churning on additional questions and give those to them later as well. So that being said, we have the decision before us. These three, the ANSI 3 or 3 plus, and the 3 are the ones that are outlined in statute. Literature reviews of Eastern Oregon steep slopes, requirement of baseline trend monitoring of road rules, and amphibians. And there's more to the story behind each one of these from the CFA authors that, we should dig into more and have more conversation. I know Stacy's got some background being a part of some of that discussion as well that would be helpful for us to consider there. But I think those 3 are definitely the ones that we need to, it's more or less kind of a perfunctory exercise for us to vote those 3 in, since the statute already tells us these 3 are priority for in the beginning. The question really is, do we just adopt those 3, or do we adopt those 3 plus something else? And Josh, in the interim between last meeting and this meeting, sent Terry 3 of those additional 2 that are listed there. I don't know if that's what you want to speak to, but go ahead, Josh.
Whenever you're ready.
Sure, go for it.
Sometimes
Floor is yours to talk about.
sometimes the one wrinkles in here,
Yeah.
I should explain. Okay, thanks a lot. That was really good. All right, so we got the 3. So essentially, the reason I hope I honed these and made them more sensible, since understandable, since our last meeting when I was a little more off the cuff. But the riparian prescriptions and in Western Oregon, the steep slope rules, along with the road rules, those are really the kind of the 3-legged stool for how we meet the biological goals and objectives that are being worked out in the habitat conservation planning process. So, some of the riparian stuff or steep slope stuff could be covered in amphibian questions. I wanted to call them out as individual things because, again, these are really the key. Are these what we have in the PSA? Is it overprotective? Is it underprotective? Is it in the sweet spot? That's a really crucial question to answer. My conception of this is these are less immediate priorities since, it's next week, or starting Saturday, we're implementing the fish-bearing riparian rules, and everything else doesn't go into effect until January of next year. So there won't even be data to collect on these 2 for a few years. So my conception of this is really the first priorities for coming up with research questions are A, B, and C, the statutory ones. But I think we should get those in there because they're such a key to how we meet the biological goals and objectives. And indeed, they were really the biggest area of compromise, I think, for all the parties involved in the negotiation. So that's kind of the, PFA Habitat Conservation Plan perspective. And I think I talked at length really about that last time. So I'd also like to add a little bit from, one of the 2 voting state agency members' perspective, like as a state agency person. And so, as the DEQ point person for this, I've gotten a lot of questions about these from various federal agencies or other state agencies, and even other programs within DEQ. And so, we've got, for example, implementation of total maximum daily loads for temperature or for sediment-based parameters, dissolved oxygen, all of which have a forestry component to them. And then we've also got the mess with the Coastal Zone Management Act, where our coastal plan was disapproved largely due to forestry practices, disapproved by EPA and NOAA's Coastal Division in 2015. And so I'm DEQ's lead on trying to put together a revision to our coastal plan that will pass muster and get a pretty substantial portion of federal funding coming back to Oregon that we've lost. And so in both of those cases, in the total maximum daily load program within DEQ and then the coastal program, where DEQ and Department of Land Conservation and Development are the leads, for both of those, we, as in DEQ and in a larger sense, the state government of Oregon, really want to be able to rely on the private forest accord rules for TMDL implementation on forest lands and for saying to the federal agencies, we have a forestry program that can meet the needs for the Coastal Zone Management Act. But in both of those cases, we're going to be leaning on, if it's not good enough, we have an adaptive management program that over time can make it good enough. And so in addition to the habitat conservation plan and the sort of straightforward species-based implementation, including these two topics, would then on the Clean Water Act side and Coastal Zone Management Act side, make it much easier for the state of Oregon to argue between the rules we've got now and the adaptive management program, we can do this and we don't need to do anything else other than let the adaptive management program do its thing. And so that's another reason this shows willing for the state government on these two topics and the questions that EPA and NOAA Coastal have raised, and that and you know, gives us more space on the total maximum daily load side to just work through it instead of trying to impose a different set of rules for total maximum daily. And I'm happy to clarify anything, but thank you.
Any questions, David?
So this, to make sure I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Your areas, are they focused on the coast? Are they the ones that are originating this question? And so are you just wanting to have it for those reasons or do it statewide?
Yeah. So yeah, I think these are important questions just for the MC and for the species protection side of it. The coastal zone plan is only for the coastal zone. So that is west of the Coast Range crest, but it also includes the entire Umpqua and Rogue River basins, and those are in the coastal zone. So that's what's addressed in the coastal plan. Total maximum daily loads apply. We have them throughout the state of Oregon, and the big ones are temperature, which is really, of course, then on forest lands all about shade, and essentially retaining what shade there is before harvest, and having essentially the same shade levels or close to after harvest. And so, you know, we have coastal, we have John Day and Malheur and Powder River total maximum daily loads, but we also have them on the coast. And those, of course, are key to the local ecology because that's what drives, you know, what the system potential shade is. So to answer your question, those apply just in the coastal zone as far as the coastal non-point control plan that the state of Oregon has to get approved by EPA and NOAA's coastal division. But for purposes of TMDL implementation, it's really a state.
Any other questions or discussion? Go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, I really appreciate your perspective and sort of the purpose and intent of why you want these and kind of tying it into that funding and everything else. I guess one thing that I just want to note is, like I said, I just for all transparency, I mean, right now with how these are worded, I do not want to move forward with how these three topics are worded. I would have some proposals for how I think that they could be changed to be really focused in quite a bit more based on the language in the report. But, and I think given that, I think we are going to have plenty to work on with those three. And I don't know that we will even have enough money in the budget to be able to address the research questions associated with those. So although I think that what Josh is saying is completely reasonable and it makes a lot of sense to me from a scientific background, I think that we're going to have enough on our plate, and the IRST is going to have enough on their plate. So I think they're good ones to keep in the hopper, you know, just from my perspective. But.
Any other thoughts, Casey?
Well, I would say that, clearly, Amanda wants to talk about the specifics of the first three, the statutory three, as I think about it, but I want to make sure that we don't get too off of Josh's. And I will say that I think you laid it out much more in a way that is more helpful to me than I understood what you were trying to say, but you've put it into a bigger context now. I think it could be valuable for us to consider including those as two. And I would say that probably the only thing is that I want to make sure that we have research questions that are really valuable. And so it might be helpful to actually remove the species relevant water quality parameters, because I think of water quality as part of habitat. And that's just my own like Scrivener's notes of sorts. But I understand what you're saying in terms of the TMDL especially, and how if you don't need to create another whole set of rules and regulations, that this could be the standalone for that, and that could be very helpful across a lot of agencies. I don't know if you have any thoughts on it, Julie.
Well,
I mean, I'm sure you do, but specifically now.
yeah. I don't know that I have more to say on that particular thing, except to say that I like the comprehensiveness of having what you proposed. I think, like you mentioned, you know, we've got these three ways that we can, three levers that we can pull to try and make forest management work alongside of aquatic and forest habitats, and that it just feels a little more organized and systematic to look at, you know, if we've got these three main arms of what we're doing, we want to make sure that we're covering all of that, and then there may be more specific questions that we have as well. But it just feels like a good foundation to look at all three of those things.
It strikes me as you're talking that the three that are in statute actually cover those three arms. Literature review of Eastern Oregon steep slopes is steep slopes, right? Requirement of baseline trend monitoring for road rules is roads, and amphibians is all about the riparian prescriptions. And so actually the three main arms of the of sort of what was negotiated under the PFA are represented in A, B, and C. Now, the 1 and 2 below that, what you're offering is certainly a broader, you know, it's not just the amphibians, but all of the riparian prescription effectiveness monitoring. It's not just east side steep slopes, it's all of Western Oregon steep slopes. And effectiveness monitoring, that could be looking at the model itself, it could be looking at the results of the model, it could be looking at, is the model calibrated correctly? Does it actually hit the 33% after a storm event, or does something need to be adjusted or whatever? So it's far more broad in nature. I tend to lean towards the three, and I agree with Amanda. I like your thoughts there, Josh, and I do think, and I also I like Casey's thought about maybe, you know, playing with the verbiage there. Some of the, I guess I lean towards putting those as a very important next conversation in that sort of parking lot. How do we hone in on these and ensure that we have a piece of each one of these things, roads, slopes, riparian, as our priorities moving forward. And I think having more conversation specifically with the EQ would help us figure out how do we ensure that this program is doing what you're hoping it does in order to check all the boxes with coastal zone and the other, you know, water issues. Yeah. So, Julie.
Yeah, I just had a question before we got too deep in discussion of how to edit the existing three.
agree, because as a result of this conversation, I got some ideas too, but I'm not sure how much leeway we have to do that if it's in statute. Can we do that?
My understanding is no. And, I'm sorry, I didn't think about that particular question ahead of time, but, you know, rules, that these are going to be your priority. Having said that, I totally agree that it'd be great if these were more refined, and that's the next step is you will be refining those into research questions. And going forward, yeah, it would be better if you had research topics that were more clearly constrained. And there's a number of reasons why the authors landed with these. So I think today, that formal step is those three should say that.
Julie, is that a response? Go ahead.
Yeah. So, but maybe we could put forward those three and give additional comments about how we envision they could be focused or refined.
For sure, and I think that's the conversation of this group after we formalize that adoption. And so 100%, you're already sort of getting that way. And whether we refine I agree with Terry. I think the statute is clear that I don't think we can necessarily mess with that, but with the verbiage, the way it's written in statute. But at the same time, I do think we definitely 100% can decide on what are the research questions that come out of that, which ultimately could be considered as like subtopics, right? Out of there. So David, somebody online? Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to interrupt the flow, but getting back to the TMDL, kind of a question for Josh is that the mechanism to address if, whether TMDLs are being met, and if they aren't, is primarily through the petition from the EQC. So I guess if there's multiple mechanisms by which rules are changed, I think need to be careful what the implications are of that. And, that is described in Senate Bill 1501 and related to the effectiveness monitoring and adaptive management. So I guess I need to look a little bit more into that to, I think before thinking that this would be a good approach in terms of addressing TMDL issues.
Yeah, Adam, to clarify, I'm not suggesting that the AMC specifically consider TMDL issues. What I'm suggesting is if the AMC is addressing topics that would also need to be addressed from a TMDL perspective, then that whole petition situation or having basin rules could potentially be avoided. And ideally would be avoided for the sake of clear, easy to understand, consistent forestry rules.
Okay,
Sure.
I guess I'm not following the distinction that you made there. They sounded pretty similar. Can you clarify a little bit on that?
Yeah, so the AMC is really an Endangered Species Act based process. There's not clean water assurances here. So as I understand the statute, it didn't really change the Clean Water Act processes. So, we could still pursue basin rules to implement TMDLs or an EQC petition to implement TMDLs, which would basically result in basin by basin forestry rules rather than Western Oregon, Eastern Oregon forestry rules. So if the AMC is addressing Clean Water Act concerns through its attention on the Endangered Species Act process, then it would allow us to avoid having to, go through a basin rule process to implement TMDLs or EQC petition or anything like that if there was a difference between what a TMDL requires and what the rules are under the PFA.
Okay.
They remain two separate. They remain in theory two separate processes, but this is a a forum in which we can, address adaptive management questions, especially given the close overlap between ESA concerns and Clean Water Act concerns, especially on something like temperature, where the covered species under the PFA are also the most sensitive species that the temperature standard is built around.
She was saying it to the extent possible, two birds with one stone.
Exactly.
If there's a there and we can match that, and that would be helpful for
Okay.
your program to be able to thread that needle.
Yeah.
I think that's worthy of consideration and conversation and learning about what that might be.
Yeah.
Jason.
Great. So just wanted to clarify process as I thought through and for the conversation. So we've got these 3 research topics that cannot be changed. We're agreeing that they cannot be changed. So those are the 3. Our decision in front of us is going to be those 3 plus. And then once that decision is made, though, what I've also heard is that the questions under those 3 or 3 plus are then flexible, and that's where we can really get down to the meat and potatoes essentially.
Absolutely.
And bring in potentially, rather than having, say, these topics, the add-on topics, there could be components of those topics that come into the research questions. So those are,
Yes.
just want to make sure I'm tracking the overall.
Yeah. All right, Amanda, then Will.
Okay, so I guess I maybe disagree that, so the rule says the following topics shall be prioritized. It says that these 3 things should be prioritized, and that's what we have up here.
Now, I guess I don't want to get ahead of you, so, I kind of want to launch off here, but Will, if you've got something else, I'll let you go.
I was thinking that we didn't move those 3 forward, but so go ahead. I'll take mine down.
But I guess what I'm about to suggest is not that the intent of any of these are changed.
And so I think that if these are more focused based on the language in the report,
that we would still be meeting the regulatory intent of these topics being prioritized. So I guess, I'd like to hear what everybody else thinks. If it's a more focused topic based on the actual language in the report,
do you not feel like that still meets the intent of the regulation that these 3
topics are prioritized?
So what it says later in the rule is develop the initial list of research topics, including their priorities in OAR. You just read.
It doesn't say verbatim, it says including the priorities.
So, I'm not a lawyer and I can't.
So Wendy, put your card up. So go.
That was like, I thought the statute was clear that these are the 3 initial topics. So that's why the first agency, it seemed to me that those were not changeable. However, whatever we do would be subject to what the guidance of the report, which is adopted by statute. So that's sort of my kind of way of thinking about that. But I also thought, like what Josh has said makes sense to me about the other 2, 1 and 2, in terms of efficiency. It seems to me like the group has had a bit of discussion about that, and that there's enough stuff that it'd be good to have that as a topic, because after all, a topic is something where we consider it over time and might develop into questions and might end up being funded. So it seems to me there's enough discussion to support that from my perspective anyway. Those 2 additional questions being added as topics, given what we mean by topics.
Okay, Will, then Stacy.
So I'm not an attorney, but I play an attorney once a month or more like, maybe more than once a month, but we go as a commissioner. So, but my thought was, I don't think that these 3 are cast in concrete, because the research questions that we create out of it really change what these 3 topics, where they go. And so the question is, for me, is that I'd like to see us get past the topics and get these 3 set. And then whether we take the question that Josh had about process, I think that Josh's comments about broadening our perspective of how we relate to the agencies, to me, that's what his questions are really about. And that is, and we should be thinking about it as we talk about steep slopes, we should be thinking about how we ask the right questions to satisfy DPADQ and answer the question. So I would say that let's just take the three, be done with the three, if these are in fact the topics. And we will, but now the challenge is listening to Amanda and the others who were there that can help us figure out what the questions are that we are trying to answer. And keep in mind Josh's desire to be broad enough in the way we ask these questions, that we're answering a question that he can use to say, we don't need to do this additional work here because we're answering these questions in this research. And so I was going to make a motion, but I'm not ready to make it the second. I was ready to make a motion to say we have the three questions, and let's just move forward with those three. And now the hard work really is writing the questions that match those topics.
Like a quick response?
Go ahead.
I would just feel like, to me, A, B, and C have specific narrowing of the topics. They mention plus rather than amphibians, but the first two narrow those. And so I think at this point, when we're talking topics, our mandate really is more to be thinking broadly to allow least wait for our question development later. So that, for that reason, I would suggest including 1 and 2 is specifically referred to effectiveness monitoring.
Stacy?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with you, Amanda, as far as getting to that specificity. I'm just imagining that happening in the second step in the question development. And so I think we all agree, A, B, C right now aren't really focused research questions or even focused topics, you might say. They're a little bit. But I think my understanding of this is, one, those three are reflecting some of the outcomes of the PSA. And that's, again, why I think it's important to have this process established moving forward, because they're going to be forward-facing on new topics. But I think I would agree with Julie and Josh as far as the three legs of the stool and kind of the benefit of being comprehensive upfront that then allows us to be more specific. So I think it's just sort of when that refinement element happens.
Yeah, I think I really agree with Amanda in a lot of ways, especially on amphibians. So, obviously I want all 5. I think the 2 I included, I'm happy to say are a much lower priority, as I said, like these aren't even implemented yet. And then when it comes to A, B, and C in particular, I mean, like on amphibians, I think the first question we ask of the IRST on that one, when we get to that point, is, hey, can you scope out what amphibians even mean? But I agree. I think that at the very least, we want to get those 3 as they are. And like I said, I've been thinking about this, and I'm like, that might just be a help us scope this out kind of question for the IRST on amphibians, given that it's an entire category of living things.
Living for us. Amanda?
So I'm going to provide some context. So I'll start with amphibians. So according to the report, it specifically says that, more or less the question posed in the report that needs to be answered by the AMPC is, how is the persistence of Columbia and southern horned salamander populations impacted by riparian and unstable slope protections in the Forest Practice Act? That is what amphibian means. So that's why I'm saying, if all we have as a research topic is amphibians, that doesn't actually get to what the intent of the report says we should be talking about. So is it reasonable to say that the report, that the research topic should be more focused based on what the intent was in the report, which is approved in statute? And so I have examples of the other ones as well. So, that's the first one. And it also says, if you've got time and money, you can look at other covered species, and you can also look at Cascade torrent salamander, which is not covered under the HCP. But hey, if you want to do these other things too, great. But that is what amphibian means as it pertains to the report.
The report.
And so again, if we clarified that in the research topic, would that be getting away from the intent of the regulation, saying that amphibians is something that we should be research topic that shall be prioritized?
Well, and I don't necessarily think there's from what I'm hearing from everyone, I don't think there's disagreement on the clarification. And I think that what you're honing at is like, you've got you're chomping at the bit to refine them as research topics. I think that's one way to look at it. You could definitely do that. I think there's others that are saying, let's do that, but let's do that as we develop the questions. And that way we're comfortable with more of a general research topic with refinement that you're doing, pulling that out of the report and helping that in that conversation. I think both are potentially valid. I don't know, from my perspective, I don't know that we're going to be put in AMC jail for refining the legislature's topics. At the same time, I am sure that we are far more legally defensible. Not that I'm worried about that, but if we just adopt A, B, and C, and then refine from there, I think both could be valid, but I think one is maybe 100% qualified, where the other one's maybe 99% sure. David, does somebody online have a comment?
Yeah, make a clarifying comment, but it's essentially.
So with that, I don't know, Will, if you're ready to entertain. Oh, Amanda, you have a response.
I mean, more or less, I just want to make a quick comment on the other two as well, but more or less, I'm fine with us moving forward with what we have. I just want to get on the record what the intent is in the report, so that we don't continue saying amphibians is so big and wide open, and what are we trying to get at? Well, the report actually says it. Yeah. And that should be something that probably should have been talked about up front, and it wasn't, and so I'm trying to get it on record.
Sure, no, that's good.
And
so recorded.
Yes. For the other two, I'll go back up to Eastern Slope. So, again, I think this one is a little bit more straightforward, but the report specifically says the primary goal is basically answering the question of how timber harvest impacts the likelihood of an upslope initiated shallow rapid slide in Eastern Oregon. Not just about steep slopes in Oregon, it's about
timber harvest in relation to initiated shallow rapid, yeah.
In Eastern Oregon as it pertains to timber harvest. And then secondarily,
just the nearest the roads one, I'm gonna get to here in a moment. I'll pull the language from the PFA report on this.
okay, you probably know what I have to say.
Exactly. I plucked it right out of the report, put it in this slideshow. So.
But no, that's very useful, Amanda, and thank you for doing that background, reading back into the PFA.
Yeah.
I think that's something we're going to need to do as we hone in on each one of these. So,
yeah,
100% valid point.
Yeah, and then just the secondary piece is on other hill slope processes that affect covered species. So, and then what Perry's probably about to get to, so I won't belabor it, but it's not all about road rules. It's about hydrologic
Connectivity, yeah.
And so again, that's where it's like, I'm just a little bit uncomfortable, and I'm okay living in that uncomfortability. We can all agree that it's not about the entirety of the road rules, it's really about hydrologic connectivity.
Casey.
I think you summed up really what I was going to say, but I did want to add one clarification, because I think that we should adopt the first A, B, and C as they're stated here, and then really dive into the topics, dive into the specific questions and how we craft those from what's in the PFA report, and from I think it's important to pull on the experience and knowledge here and there when crafting those questions. So the PFA report intent is important, but we're here beyond the PFA, which is why Commissioner Tucker is here, for example.
But I think what you just said was the motion. Yeah, I would second that. So think about that, because that's exactly where I see it. We have to respect the PFA. Have logic, not raising my hand. So we have to respect the PFA, and that is where yours and others who were there can really help us.
I wasn't there.
But can really help us, because I was not there. I was, not locked out, but there was not a place for elected officials to be there. But the questions for me, how we get the questions and respect the work that was done and the compromises made by all involved, that is important, that we, at least for the next 2, 3, 4 years, respect that. But someplace down the road, if we are supposed to be moving us to a different place. And that's, I always want to get into the towards out question, which is where I'm excited about moving towards.
I think there was we're at that inflection point towards
That's where I'm going from.
CSA and two. Oh, I'm not ready for a motion because I wanted to find out how, Josh, if you, looking at your proposals, I have a hard time seeing the very specific parts of them fitting into A, B, and C as they currently kind of the universe. Like, I think they're kind of slightly outside of it. And I wonder whether, are you still like, I need to have riparian prescriptions and habitat in here, and Western Oregon steep slopes and habitat in here? Because I have a hard time seeing them be in there, but I think that.
You mean you don't think they're necessarily encapsulated?
I think we're going to struggle to have them inside of A, B, and C, and so I want to make sure that we're at this point.
I mean, they kind of have a place in C, especially based on what Amanda just read. I'm concerned about the fish-bearing streams, if those aren't particularly amphibian laden. But you know, I think kind of thinking about from the perspective of what kind of a case can I make with interacting with others, it's a lot easier if 1 and 2 are in there in some form. Otherwise, I'm, you know, digging into the report and bringing up the amphibian stuff. So my preference would be ABC 1, 2, and then prioritize ABC. But, you know, I think we can get there one way or the other.
Thank you. Thanks for allowing me that.
Stacy's hand is up,
Yeah.
her card is up.
I appreciate you pulling those, Amanda, having been part of that, and particularly the roads piece. I had asked Carrie to pull out that section because there's really a roadmap for us. I was just seeing that as part of the question conversation, particularly for those 3, because they're in statute, almost like I'm as eager as you to get to that point and appreciate that context, because I think there's a lot both to draw on from the report. And then now we'll have the IRST expertise as well, and other experts we can bring in to even further refine those. So there's some great studies to look at related to the road stuff. Would love to start kind of circulating that and getting our thoughts about that. But I appreciate you pulling that specificity because, you know, it's a while ago now, it's old buddy, and it's helpful to go back and really pull out that actually we were a little more specific about the intention there.
Okay, so we're now eating into our field time. So I want to respect those who have comments, but I ask that you, it sounds like we're circling around a decision here that I think will be pretty well universally accepted. And so with that, Wendy, so any last minute thoughts?
I'm interested in the efficiency of just setting us up for overlay of Clean Water Act and Endangered Species Act by including the 1 and 2 that are up there. And I just be a little concerned going forward, relying only on A for steep slopes, because it just says Eastern Oregon, and that doesn't include Western Oregon, which is, if we include 1 and 2, it does include Western Oregon.
Yep. Keep in mind, this is just the initial priority list. This is not set in stone forever. David?
Mine is very related comment. We seem to be making a distinction to one piece of this question. Is there a timing and or way in which they're delivered consideration for topics versus questions? Topics will be delivered before questions. Does that enable different process for, you know, tying those into consideration?
Yeah, and I think that the work group that's getting together to think about what that process looks like moving forward can have that similar consideration.
Really, really quick. So I guess with that said, what David said, I think,
You know, if DEQ had money to study TMDLs and we had a question associated with one of these topics, I think that there could be some sort of a agreement worked out that would potentially address some of those concerns. So, you know, right now, I think the money associated with this general fund money is really, really focused on the species stuff, is really, really focused on, you know, these specific questions and sort of what that intent was that I read. But there is likely to be a space, I think, for that, especially if DEQ comes to the table, you know, with some resources. I would imagine.
Yeah. It'd help if we could get that 319 money back. Wouldn't be the first time we funded the study without the money.
Jason, go ahead.
I get the sense there may be some additional discussion. So, but I am prepared to make a motion for the initial three, just to move those off in our decision making, and maybe hold some time for additional conversation.
Thank you. We have a motion on the table for the A, B, and C and adopting those. Do we have a second? Commissioner Tucker, second. Discussion.
Clarification, we're voting on the three, but not on rejecting.
Not excluding the other.
Exactly.
Just to get the three off the table.
So motion is to get 1, 2, and 3 on there. Discussion, any more discussion? All those who say aye? Aye. And any opposed? Decision is unanimous, A, B, and C. Is there any, second motion or any other thought about, do we stop there? Do we move, on the other two?
I'll move that we include 1 and 2 as well.
Okay, Julie moves that we include 1 and 2. Wendy seconds. Any discussion there?
So I do think we have a lot of substantial conversations to have around these three. I don't want us to lose those two questions. So I want us to work on the three, keeping those two questions in mind, and maybe we don't get all the answers Josh would like to see us have, because we're looking only at one of the steep slopes. We're only looking in one type of amphibian, and we're not looking at fish as he would like us to see us do. But I would see us, we have so much work to develop on those three, that I'd like to see us focus on the three for 2 months or 3 months, and then be ready to take those two back and bring them back to the table and move them into one topic or and these are part of the questions that come out of that topic. And I don't know, but I see that I think we have so much to do on just those three that I see a lot of work for us.
Thank you, Commissioner. Julie or David?
As I've been sitting here listening about this, it seems to me as we go around and around that the best thing, in my opinion, based on what I said at the last meeting, would be to focus on these three. These two, to me, are in some respects subsets of what parts of those three are, but yet there's a host of other questions that I brought up the last time that should also be considered. That, as we unfurl this thing, you're going to wind up with a whole bunch more stuff. So it seems to me that I would be more comfortable just staying with these first three and moving on, but keeping these two in the hopper and adding them to the others that are most assuredly going to be developed.
Thank you. Julie?
Yeah, I guess, the reason that I'm interested in having those there is just for sort of an organizational hierarchy. Because to me, it seems more that A, B, and C are subsets of 1 and 2 than the other way around. And that, we could say we want effectiveness monitoring of roads and riparian and steep slopes. And an example in our top priority for, this category is, can I see what those were again? Anyway, so our priority for riparian is looking at amphibians. Our priority for looking at steep slopes is looking at the specifics on Eastern Oregon steep slopes, and our priority for roads is whatever the context was that's stated in the plan. And then, it to me, that going forward, that gives us a framework of how we're thinking about it, that then everything else can fit in.
David?
Just real quick, I guess in my opinion, monitoring is a subset of.
True.
Because monitoring is
Sure.
together. And so,
Yeah.
in one form or another. And so that's why I was hoping that those two would be kept in the hopper, because they could be a component of the other three. So, you're, that's why I think, if you're monitoring something, you're not really looking at it in a global sense. That's part of the puzzle, or the part of the way to answer the puzzle. And so, like with amphibians, you're going to monitor something about it.
Right.
About the steep slopes, you're going to monitor something about the steep slopes. And so I look at it, that's why I look at it more as a subject.
Julie, is there a response?
It is.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so maybe it's a clarification. the way I've been thinking of it, I haven't been really focusing on the effectiveness monitoring, but it could be, we look at these three broad topics, riparian prescriptions, roads, and steep slopes. And within those, effectiveness monitoring would be one of the, yes?
Yes.
Okay, Amanda.
So I have just two quick questions. So I guess from Terry, I'm curious, and maybe this is a Megan conversation, but including the effectiveness monitoring makes it seem like ODS is not going to do any of that. Is that true? And that has to come from this body, or is ODS already going to do some of that? I just seriously don't know.
Right, so, for adaptive management purposes, the rules, ODS sort of can't. Now, in relation to TNDLs and whatnot, that's a possibility. But I think overall, and this is a little fluid, I think overall, we're not going to be doing, ODS is not going to be doing significant effectiveness monitoring
Outside of this program.
outside of this program. And that,
David. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, so I think effectiveness monitoring to some extent will still happen with ODF. Section 39 of Senate Bill 1501 describes kind of what the board, in terms of rule change, what they can't do. A lot of anything related to aquatic resources has to happen through AMC with a few exceptions, including, the petition from EQC. But we do have what I count as effectiveness monitoring is the post-disturbance harvest rulemaking and the tethered logging rulemaking that's required down further down the road. There might be other effectiveness monitoring topics that we cover down the road that basically topics that weren't part of the private forest accord negotiations and agreements. So not completely ruling it out of monitoring, but I think some of it still will happen within ODF.
And a quick follow-up to Adam or anybody in the room is, how does that then tie back into like the mitigation fund? Won't there have to be some sort of monitoring associated with?
That's a different animal, and
I'm like,
yeah, the mitigation program, of course, is outside of the standard rule application process, and there'll probably be some monitoring there, but that's TBD, frankly. So.
and that's fine. My one last thing is really, Stacy and others in the room that were in the room. I guess from the author's perspective, I'm just curious. Obviously, the rule specifically says prioritize these three, and that left room for adding additional. But given that we didn't get all the money associated that we were asking for, I mean, what is the author's perspective? Like, should we be seeking more outside of those three, given that we didn't get the money, given that, these three were what was set out by the authors to do, and if adding more takes away from funding that could go to substantiating these other three, I mean, is that concerning? Like, I don't know. Like,
I guess just to respond for myself, I think that happens in the back and forth with us and the questions, and then with IRST, where they come back and say, and I think we'll need to do a prioritization. We can move forward with these three or 3+, whatever it is, and come up with our list of questions that I imagine we'll prioritize within those as well. Back and forth with IRST, get some budget numbers. Some are going to be a lot more targeted. I could see the road one being pretty discrete, maybe able to move forward on that pretty quickly. I mean, the budget definitely is a key element of that, but I guess personally, I don't see this level precluding additional topics. And I feel like we're generally on the same page with the idea of a parking lot. It's maybe the question before us now is, are these three the ones and only the ones that we officially move forward with and keep a parking lot, or do we move forward with all 5?
So before we continue, I think this is all really good discussion. I think that from my perspective, I would like to see us land on the 3, park these other 2, work on. I think there's some potential ideas about the verbiage in these other two, either broadening or honing in. I think all of that is valid conversation. We should have that. I think it's maybe a little bit too, and David's got some other additional ideas. I think others probably too, about other stuff that we would put there. Look at that in context of these. And for all of those reasons, I kind of want to move us along in this conversation so that we can so we don't miss out on what a lot of these other people were here to show us, and start honing in a little bit on the roads piece. And so, at the same time, I don't want to cut it off. I realize there's some strong feeling around the table and people want to move forward. But Julie, knowing that there are those that have some concerns with the verbiage and some idea of parking lot.
Conversation with David here. So, you know, as long as we'll have the chance to go through or find things before we are handing things off to IRST, because, you know, if it was me, if I was handed that list of three, that would be a little bewildering. So I'll retract my motion, yeah.
The motion has been retracted. Josh?
I was just gonna suggest, table this for, let's get that was my suggestion. Obviously, I have strong feelings about these topics. I think we can hone them as a group. I think, we can get our initial research questions, because I think those first three need to be where our research questions come from anyway. Get the research questions in front of the IRST, and then, you know, this winter, perhaps we can revisit what other topics might we need to get in the hopper, as someone
Totally
hopper,
Yep.
going forward, to make sure that the adaptive management program is doing as much as it can for the state government and its need to deal with water quality and species protection.
Fair enough. Thank you. Wendy?
I just want to say, that sounds good to me, but I would like to make sure that we have some sort of recognition that we have that, and we'll bring it up again. Don't forget it. Yep.
So noted. Okay, excellent. Stacy?
One last quick thing, I'd be happy to be part of the group that's working on process for this too, I think. Make sure that we are moving that forward.
Excellent. So before we, I turn the time over to Terry to move us to our next stage, let's formally visit that question. And we've got, so we need, without forming a quorum, I would like a few people to be willing to serve on that from various perspectives, to serve as a work group to help Terry think through what that process would be for revisiting our topics in the future. So Casey has volunteered to be
Well, it sounds like, if, Stacy.
More than welcome to it.
Because you have a lot of other interests.
Okay, so Casey has volunteered to be a part of it.
With Julie's permission, I could be at any.
Okay, Josh? Dave? Fantastic. We have those three. Thank you for stepping up, guys. And I will leave it to you three and Terry to talk about scheduling that and working out when to get together. But thanks for doing that. So thank you. That was a robust conversation. We made it through another substantial decision.
So just to keep us moving along, I don't know why this isn't changed the way I'd like to, but, so road rules. We've got some folks in the room, real quick, if you folks over here want to just, we haven't introduced you yet. Pepper Sean Gordon with INR, thank you for showing up.
That's what he looks like in 3D. Oh, that's right, you were. Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Moving along.
January.
Michael, you want to say a few words about Forest Corps from the district perspective, and for you, go for it.
A minute or two. So yeah, private Forest Corps, so working at the district level, right, we're really responsible for the field implementation of it, right? So with that, so we've gained 2 additional staff through the PFA, one in particular around small forest landowner forester, and then we also gained an additional stewardship forester.
not all districts got all that, but for us, just based off an analysis of patient workload that we've got and the resources protected in the area, that's what kind of drove that for us. So, big thing is training for us right now and getting our foresters trained up. You know, I think it's been a learning process and learn as you go, both, I would say, with industry and our stewardship foresters. A little bit different with the small forest landowners, very different level of engagement depending on the small forest landowner. Some are professional foresters, some don't know anything about forestry. And we're actually running into quite a bit of folks that didn't even know the PFA was going on or felt they had a voice at the table there. So working through a different range of emotions with those folks, and it's taken a lot of time, energy, and effort working with them. But I think we're slowly getting there, but it's going to take some time, in particular on the small landowners, to get them up. So, you know, what we, you know, Terry and we talked through what we've been hearing from the landowners. Yeah, just kind of went through a lot of that, but really just learning with us. And then, like I said, it's fine. Taking more time. I think it's going to be another year or two before we get there. But a lot of them up to speed. So, the training's going good. It's been slow go just because in the past it's been one subset of the rules that we need to work through. Now it's a very large set of rules, so we need to get through it pretty quickly. So it's been a slow go to get there, but I think we're on a good path forward to get folks trained up and ready to go with it. So, I guess any questions, from a field perspective, implementation of the PFA folks have on here?
Thanks for having us here.
Yeah, thank you very much. So this is what you're about to reference. So baseline monitoring methods based off of these two articles, I'll get those to you folks. And so the purpose of the baseline and trend monitoring, as stated in the private forest report, is to establish a baseline and monitor and report the change in hydrologic conductivity over time as a FRIA is implemented. FRIA is Forest Road Inventory and Assessment, that's right, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the field. I want to minimize how much we're talking about those things here rather than taking the dirt, looking at the culvert or a cross stream. So, an overarching goal is to ensure all forest roads and land use shall be hydrologically disconnected, maximum extent feasible from the waters of state and issues results of the common and develop future goals consistent with that monitoring. This is in the private forest report. It's also this slide is in the packet we have. So today, when we go out to the field here in a few minutes, start thinking about how to do this, and we're also going to look at dispassion because that's a valuable component of this whole perspective. And then the focus of today is not are the rules implemented correctly, which is compliance. That's a different question. It's important, but it's not the focus of your work. So just to keep in mind, we're not out there trying to assess compliance. So logistics, thanks to Bill Marr and Michael Kern and Leah Williamson from the district setting this up. Director Forest, Jennifer Beek and Randy Herford, really appreciate them allowing us on our land and helping some of the logistics. But it's staff, Paul Clemens, Jimmy Miller, Ian Hicks, David Schultz, Greg Herb, and then Josh is here today as well, Josh Hanson. Loading the vans. Lunches are in those coolers back there that have their names on them. If you didn't sign for lunch, you'll get handed something that says extra or something like that. Box full of hard hats.
We'll dig into the coolers and hand out.
Yeah, exactly. So bring your stuff. And then the last stop of the day, I'll have sort of a wrap up conversation there. So we'll come back here, but we're not going to reconvene. So the last stop is the last conversation of the day. So anything, there will be more details as we get going. All right, just basic things. There could be voice poison oak and bee slash hornets in the field.
Ground nesting, in other words.
Yeah, so just situational awareness, data and communication.
Use the facilities before you leave.
Yeah, so again, there's 2 restrooms upstairs, 2 restrooms downstairs. Anything else before, the names are out front. Everyone, let's get into, all right, let's have Seth on this side with me, Casey on that side with David, and your other folks filter into one of the 2 hands.
All right.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
One guy.